Okay, we'll get started. I'm going to record this for the people who are missing, okay? So we're going to be talking about Desdemona and Desdemona's decline and how rapidly this occurs and how we can see this in these speeches that we so far we've not really looked at Desdemona very much. We've been very male-focused. But obviously, if you're a feminist critic, you're going to be extremely interested in Desdemona. You can be very interested in Emilia and the relationship between those women. So I'm going to start off here in Act 1, Scene 3, with this speech. We all know that this speech happens in a public occasion. Where does that happen, Sean? Before the senators. Is this a place where you usually hear a female voice? No, so it's an intrusion into the kind of it's a public occasion, and it's the kind of male sphere of public service. It's a court of law. It would be a great surprise to a Jacobean audience, would it not? Because she speaks in such a measured way with so much confidence. And of course, prior to this, antecedent to this, what's happened is Brabantio described his daughter as so shy that she would be frightened of Othello's shadow. Do you remember that? And here she speaks with incredible eloquence. What I want to highlight in the speech as well is the use of Platonic imagery. Plato was a great critic of love. He wrote a very famous book called The Symposium, which is all about love. And in it, he argues that the highest form of love is love of the soul. And remember earlier when the play opened, we had Iago, we had Rodrigo characterizing the love of Desdemona and Othello as bestial, as sexual, as dirty, as physical, as low. Here, contrary to those images, she talks about, I saw Othello's visage in his mind. So she overcomes the racial prejudice by talking about his inner beauty, etc., given that they speak of him in this way, in this racist way. But also she's insisting upon the kind of purity and religiousness of their love. She says, his valiant parts did I my soul and fortunes consecrate. Now the word consecrate is a religious verb, and you usually, when you consecrate something, you make it holy. You know, it's almost like putting holy water or something on it. So can you see that she's washing and cleaning her relationship in public, insisting upon how valid and how pure it is? It's an extraordinary speech for a young woman in a time when women would not have really spoken in these occasions. So I want you to imagine that the audience are absolutely stunned. And their first impression then of Desdemona is one of incredible composure, maturity, etc. Othello in the same scene has spoken with majesty and composure, hasn't he? So they are a star couple. They are now our tragic couple, aren't they? This is no Romeo and Juliet couple. These are two people who don't come across as immature or rash. So they undermine all of the earlier kind of polluting imagery that was used. And now we move on to Act 2. This is Cassio, and I think Shakespeare has Cassio speak of Desdemona in this way, so that we can see what a prize she is for Othello, and it helps us understand why these white Venetian characters are so angry that Othello has, you know, if we want to see it in this way, has won this prize. And of course, within patriarchy, getting a woman is often seen as a kind of competition, as a hunt. And Othello has come out as the winner. And Cassio, who we know is a little bit of a lover and a bit of a romantic guy, uses a lot of literary devices. And the metaphor that he chooses is the sonnet. Now, as you will remember from studying Romeo and Juliet, the sonnet is a hyperbolic praise of love or a woman, usually. This term, the blazon, is a literary device in which you compare a woman to various things. You might compare her skin to ivory, her cheeks to roses, her lips to cherries, her eyes to rubies, etc., etc., okay? It's this idea of a hyperbolic list in which you list off the qualities of the mistress to say how absolutely amazing she is. So why does Shakespeare put it here in Act 2? Well, my view would be it kind of gives the audience a sense of Desdemona's incredible beauty, her charms, and just what a fair prize she is. We know that Cassio knows her very well and was party to not only the courtship but the elopement. So that's really important. And he ends here by saying, and in the essential vesture of creation does bear all excellency. Well, as I've told you before, there are various versions of Othello. I would prefer that we go with our Arden version, and the line is even stronger there because it says that she does tire the engineer. Notice the archaic spelling there. And the engineer in this case refers to God. So it's almost like a blasphemous statement that God is exhausted because the rending of this beautiful kind of Helen of Troy woman took all of his creative powers and energy to do. Now, of course, it identifies Cassio as like a kind of chivalric character, a man of hyperbole. We know that he's a little bit of a kind of sexual guy. We know that he likes the women, etc., and that he's maybe prone to exaggeration. But at the same time, this is Desdemona at the high point. We've seen her as a brilliant speaker. Now we know that she is a beauty and she's admired by all. We know earlier that Brabantio had to turn away many suitors, including Rodrigo. We see the effect that Rodrigo has on Desdemona. He's completely enamored, besmitten, infatuated with her. Is he not? Yes.
So then, why give the sonnet to Cassio and not to Othello?
Why is the sonnet to well, I think that in this case it's not a full sonnet. It's not like Romeo and Juliet where Shakespeare plays a game and makes a sonnet in the middle of it. I think here it's more that it shows Cassio's inclination towards exaggeration. So how would I answer that? I'd say probably better not to give Othello a sonnet because he's a man of action. He's a man of militariness. Do you recall Iago's criticism of Cassio that he's a mere prattle without practice? This kind of justifies it a little bit, I feel. We see that Cassio's the lover and the poet, etc., the man of exaggeration. I think Othello's more measured because he's a soldier and a man of action. That would be my view, yeah? Continuing then with Act 2, Desdemona says, well praised, how if she be black and witty? If she be black and therefore have a wit, she'll find a white that shall her blackness hit. I think that should be fit. It may again be different versions. Well, why have I included this speech here? Well, I want you to see, we know that Desdemona can speak with authority in the court, but now we see a different Desdemona. Can anyone give me a word for what we'd call this little talk between Iago and Desdemona? What's it like? Anyone? Doesn't it feel like kind of banter? Do you know what I mean? That it's a kind of, hey, let's see if I can joke with you. And Desdemona moves into verse, doesn't she? In this case, she's using couplets, isn't she? It shows that she's witty. It shows that she has verbal dexterity. It's another aspect to her being, because Iago's going to get a bit naughty. We know that he starts to talk about women as housewives in their bed. Do you remember that? And he starts to talk about sexual things, etc. Once again, this kind of shows another side to Desdemona, I feel. She can joke with the boys, but at the same time, she's able to, remain within the bounds of politeness or decency. And when she feels that Iago's going too far, she stops this repartee, as the French would call it, this quick-witted kind of banter, and instead she says, "Oh, heavy ignorance that praises the worst best, But what praise couldst thou bestow on a deserving woman indeed? It's almost like she's calling out the misogyny and sexism. Yes, it's jokey, but I think it shows kind of assertion as well. And that's something we're going to see later. Now, I put it to you that it's possible that during this skirmish, this little verbal skirmish, that we could see Desdemona as winning. And when Cassio comes in, he says he speaketh home, as in homely, like very earthy. And it's almost like Iago's been put in his place. So I suspect this speech again would solidify Iago's hatred, but also show Desdemona's ability to operate in different social contexts. Moving to the next sheet now. Act 3, Scene 3, line 19. Why are we here? Well, Desdemona says, do not doubt that. Before Emilia here, I give thee warrant of thy place. In this case, we know that she is speaking to Cassio. Here, she is showing the potential that women have for loyalty. Cassio helped Othello woo her. She knows him well. Forgive the little blip in the recording there, the computer malfunctioned. So we were talking about Desdemona speaking to Cassio, and we were talking about this very valuable insight we get into Desdemona's potential for loyalty. And here she vows friendship. And I think that it's interesting for you to think structurally about how this kind of mirrors the vow between Iago and Othello. But here, there's so much kind of more moral purity at the base of this particular vow of friendship. At the same time, there's a horrible quality to it, because it is essentially the tragic error that will destroy Desdemona. In her dedication to Cassio's cause, Cassio's suit, as she calls it, she will destroy herself, and her good intentions, her altruism, will be twisted into evidence of her love and her affair and of her physical attraction to him. She says here, rather again ironically, poignantly ironically, his bed shall seem a school. So even in bed, rather than giving him the pleasures of the marital bed, she will speak about Cassio. She says this with all the best intentions in the world to illustrate her commitment. She sees herself as a female missionary, someone who will reconcile friends. As I said earlier, she remembers that Cassio enabled Othello during the courtship and elopement, and here she wishes to pay back. Unfortunately, this will result in the tragic reversal, the peripeteia, as it's called in Greek. Because from henceforth, as I write here, we will see Desdemona's rapid decline. And that's something that I want to emphasize. It is a rapid decline. So in Act 3, Scene 3, we see here still a confident Desdemona. And a short time later in Act 3, Scene 4, we will see that there is discord in the relationship, and that Desdemona does not realize the true gravity of the situation. It's something that we've spoken about in class. Desdemona's hamartia, her tragic weakness or tragic error, is not to see the rage and jealousy in Othello. She seems entirely blind to it. And this contrasts, of course, with Emilia, who notices it immediately. But of course, we should think of two things. Firstly, Emilia is of a different social class. She is someone who's been less cloistered, as we see. When we see Emilia speak to Iago, we understand that she's seen the more brutal side of men and patriarchy. On the other hand, Desdemona has a pathetic, and I'm using that term in the old sense of the word, of pathos, a sad belief in Othello's good nature. Unfortunately, the evidence of this speech is that we have a very different Othello. We notice that from the first moment Why do you speak so startlingly and rash? Desdemona does not understand what is happening. She is in a state of incomprehension. Othello's aggression and violence is new to her. And here Shakespeare signals to us the colonization, the occupation of Othello's mind. Earlier we saw Iago say, "Ha! I like not that." And he says that when he sees Cassio supposedly slinking away guiltily. Here Othello uses the same term, "Ha!" All of that eloquence, Othello's beautiful poetry is dissipating here. And Desdemona's reaction is one of incomprehension. Rather than seeing that the mention of Cassio is upsetting Othello, she sees it as a way of deflecting his anger. And this again is the tragic irony. This is something that goes throughout the play. I cannot think of any of Shakespeare's tragedies where there is so much dramatic irony. We, the audience, watch in horror as Desdemona falls into Iago's trap perfectly. Othello, again, with the handkerchiefs, the so-called ocular proof that Iago has now presented him. "Fetch it, let me see it." He's really angry. But instead of answering, Desdemona says, "This is a trick to put me from my suit. I pray, let Cassio be received." From Othello's perspective, she becomes evasive. She becomes the hypocrite, the whore of Venice that Iago told Othello that she is. From her perspective, she sees herself as doing good and of helping Cassio. This tragic misunderstanding is a pattern that goes through so many of the dialogues between Desdemona and Othello. She says here, "You have never met a more sufficient man." She doesn't know that Othello thinks that she's speaking about her lover. To him, what could be more maddening than her praising her lover, the man that she's had sex with, that's lain on top of her, as Iago says. And Othello responds with rage, screaming, "The handkerchief!" And Desdemona, "I pray, talk me of Cassio." This tragic misunderstanding between the pair can be contrasted later to Cassio and Bianca, when they also have an argument about jealousy and about infidelity and having sex with other people. And the way that they're able to reconcile is by getting the accusations out in the open. By contrast, Othello does not do this. Now that's partly because Iago's instructed him not to be open in order to catch them in the act. But it's also because the nature of their relationship is different. Maybe because their love is so idealistic, Othello cannot even bear to make the accusation more explicit. But in this scene, we see Desdemona's growing desperation. And I think a good actress here would show us that Desdemona's confidence is crumbling and disintegrating. She puts on a brave face, but she is now in a state of incomprehension. And the tragic reversal is now in operation. And it's happened in such a short amount of time that it takes the audience by surprise. And this is such a painful scene and an end to this particular speech. "A man that all his time has founded his good fortunes on your love, share dangers with you." Here she hopes that she can conjure a memory of male friendship, of kinship during the dangers of war. But instead, she conjures the green-eyed monster that mocks the flesh upon which it feeds. She feeds Othello's jealousy, and she doesn't see it. And it is genuinely tragic in this sense. Now, moving on to the final speech of our extract here. Desdemona speaking in Act 4, Scene 1. We know that in this act now, the violence has begun. You've done the assignment where you show that Othello hits Desdemona in front of Ludovico. And we've talked about how important this is, because this is Othello allowing the private sphere to interfere with his public role. This is why, in many senses, Othello is a domestic tragedy, very different from King Lear, Macbeth, and Hamlet, that revolve around much more macro-political ideas. Here the tragedy begins in the bedroom. It's the private world intruding into the public world, invading that public world. So in this scene, what do we see? Well, Desdemona is speaking to Emilia now, and this is really important, because earlier we saw Emilia betray her. And from the audience point of view now, I think we're likely to dislike Emilia and to see her as a Machiavellian character, as the kind of female counterpart to Iago, the way that she steals the handkerchief. She's a serves a vital function in terms of the plot. But that would be unfair to Emilia. I think it's better to see her almost as a kind of abused person, a victim of domestic violence. And in an act of desperation, she tries to get some approval from her husband. I don't think it's fair to say that she understands the full implications of her actions. So what do we see here? Desdemona says, "Do not talk to me, Emilia." I want to take your mind back to Act 1, Scene 3. This is a young woman who's eloquent, brilliantly eloquent in a public sphere. And here we have a woman in a private sphere, when there's less pressure or stress upon her, who no longer has words. Language fails her. And the ellipsis here, I think, indicates that she's kind of stammering. She's lost any eloquence. Othello's also lost his poetic eloquence. His language polluted with the images of blackness, of the diabolic, of the animal. Desdemona's transformation is less dramatic. She simply cannot articulate her feelings and what is happening to her. She does not have the language to explain her sense of horror. "I cannot weep, nor answer have I none, but what should go by water? Prithee, tonight, lay on my bed our wedding sheets." This is agonizing, and this is real tragedy, and this is Shakespeare the master. What a great touch to bring the wedding sheets back. These are the sheets that she hopes will symbolize to Othello all that she's given up. Her transgressive action of marrying a black foreign man, a convert to Christianity, an outsider in her culture. Well, we've seen that she loses her father, she loses her place. Many besmirch her reputation. And these sheets, ironically, are a symbol of purity to her. It's like she wants to return to that night of love before all of this hideousness began. So it's a poignant symbol. And it goes, of course, with the Willow song, which we've listened to. Again, a song of female agony. Now, it's very important that we pause to think about song, because it has a particular function within Shakespearean tragedy. And I would ask you to think back to what I've told you about Ophelia and Hamlet, and this is something we'll explore more later, who also sings as she drowns herself after experiencing incredible cruelty from Hamlet. And it's as though in Shakespeare, the female characters reach for a vehicle that can articulate their grief and their sorrow when language breaks down. So the wedding sheets, coupled with the Willow song, I think are very important from a feminist perspective in terms of showing the pain of female experience. And it would be something that many members of the audience, particularly female members of the audience, would understand, a Jacobean audience. Very different today, as we've discussed. Many people are inclined to see Desdemona as weak and foolish, and they cannot understand. They cannot understand why she allows this kind of domestic violence and this horrible treatment of her, almost accepting this hideous behavior. And of course, Emilia speaks for all of us in the audience when she says, "Here's a change indeed." And that exclamation mark, I think, shows her sense of woe and distress. Earlier, she may have betrayed Desdemona, but here she shows incredible empathy. And it's like a kind of united female experience and the power of female friendship. Because we know in the next act, Emilia will go on to die for Desdemona and will pay the ultimate cost. Thus, in my opinion, redeeming herself as a character. Now, Desdemona's speech here is a very troubling one. She says, "'Tis meet I should be used so." So it's okay that he's treating me like this. Very well. Well, it's very easy to see this as kind of female fatalism, the kind of behavior that feminists would absolutely abhor and see as weakness and as indulging patriarchal violence, etc. But I think it's very important, this is something that we've discussed in class quite a lot, not to make anachronistic judgments. We cannot judge Desdemona like she's a 21st century woman in a privileged society where women have all kinds of choices and agency that were not available to her at the time. So I would very much urge you to see this descent from a sympathetic and an empathetic point of view. See it as part of the tragedy. See how powerful and how tragic this disintegration has been. And I think this is a very valuable exercise in seeing how a character is dismantled in a relatively quick amount of time. Thank you for listening.